Welcome to the Armada Podcast with your host, Kalorn.
If you come in with a surprise list that does something weird or unique or individual, a lot of times people are going to have a way to plan for it in the future.
Fox Omega.
If you're going to fly high activation fleets right now, you need a way to mitigate pass token usage, and a lot of that is you need longer range options.
And Juliet Whiskey.
Even as a new player, I have rarely been ran off the table with Call. Like, I only have a few table wins against me.
And now, the Armada Podcast.
Hello, all you admirals out there. It is I, Juliet Whiskey, and welcome back to the Armada Podcast. I know we've been gone just for a little bit, but we are back from our hiatus right before LSO. Tonight, we do not have any guests. It is just us, the hosts. We have Kalorn and Fox Omega. Let's go ahead and get started with, well, actually, before we even get there, how have you gentlemen been? It's been about 3 weeks since we've spoken.
Hot. Really, really hot. Abnormally hot in Central Texas.
I want to be back in Michigan where I was when we recorded the last episode with Truthiness, because it was really nice to go outside and to be 70 degrees outside, because this whole Central Texas 100-degree weather crap is really killing me. But last week, one of the reasons we didn't record is because I was driving back from Michigan. But it's nice to be back and see you guys.
Welcome back. We are so happy to have you back. We thought about doing it, and then we're like, no, we need all three of us. We need everybody here. This is a monumental task and a mental burden for everybody. So let's go ahead and pass it over to tonight's moderator. I know usually we have Kalorn, but tonight it is Fox Omega.
Hello. So we
hello there.
Hello there. We, with just the three of us, and no guest this week and no tournament to speak of. I mean, we'll have a tournament to talk about next week with LSO happening in 2 days. But we wanted to start kind of leveraging the makeup of the hosts here, with Juliet Whiskey being a relatively newer player within the last 2 years, and myself having played now for about 6 years. We have some gaps that we can start bridging and having conversations about parts of the game that really don't get brought up often, or whenever people look for advice, there are things that get glossed over. And so the goal right now is to, one, get the perspective of the game from Juliet Whiskey, and then have an open conversation about some of the bigger concepts in the game. So that's where we're probably going to be starting out. Juliet, what you got?
I just wanted to point out something that I just want other newer players to really realize. I totally forgot. It's been 2 years that I've been playing this game, and I still feel brand new every time I sit down at the table. So if you are a newer player, it takes time. So just embrace. Hopefully you're listening, because these two guys, like, every time we're in a room, they're putting so much knowledge in my head, it's falling out my fifth point of contact, if you will.
Exactly. So it's a complicated game. It's a fantastic game and a beautiful design, but there are so many things to try to wrap your brain around. And so we're going to start off talking about some early conclusions that early, quote unquote, that Juliet Whiskey has versus the current competitive reality. And so the first question of the night is, Juliet Whiskey, what elements does your fleet need to have in your mind to be competitive? What do you think it takes right now, either from your experiences flying your fleet or what you've seen across the table or doing well in tournaments?
So first off, they need a better admiral. I'm sorry. every single time I just get all my ships blown up. Actually, I take that back. I have only been tabled once. Do not come for me. But the elements that I believe at least my personal fleet needs, I need to get a handle on squadrons. And just to get some clarification, because there has been questions about this due to my previous Republic statement, yay. Initially, when I started flying, I didn't want anything to do with squadrons. I couldn't stand them. It just was like, I'm just like, yo, I want big ships attacking big ships. This squadron shenanigans is just, and the more and more I play it, I'm like, man, I got to get a handle on squadrons.
It's funny you say that, Julia Whiskey, because I feel like all Armada players go through this phase of, I want to play ships. I want to play ships. I'm playing Armada to play ships. If I wanted to play squadrons, I would play X-Wing. And I went through this phase too. When I first started playing Armada, I wanted to play with either no squadrons, or I wanted to play with just a few squadrons. But the longer that I have gone on playing this game, I've realized that squadrons are an integral makeup of Armada, and you at all times have to have some kind of plan for playing with or against squads. And that like, when we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you do not have to have 134 points of squads to counter somebody else's 134 points of squads. We can talk a little bit about what counters what, but there are ways in the game to delay your opponent with a smaller squad ball if you can leverage that to your advantage to kill their carriers. And that is one of the things that is kind of the next level of play after I want to play with ships.
So it's funny that you say the using less squadrons just to tie up other squadrons. And Fox, you'll have to correct me. I can't remember the fleet I was flying against. It was I think it was Sloan. And this is where initially I had my deep love for my ARC 170s, because those are some tanky boys. And I locked down a couple of squad balls with 3 of them, and they lived through 4-5 rounds, I think.
You drove me nuts in that game, because you had 2 V19s and 2 arcs, or 4 arcs, and they were not dead until the final activation of round 5, and you hadn't lost a single token to Sloan the entire game, and you were like, man, I got these bombers and they haven't done anything. And I nearly fell out of my seat. I was like, are you kidding me? Do you see what you have no comprehension of what you just did? Like, you spent 5 rounds denying Sloan her ability, and you thought that your squads did nothing. So I was like, what? Huh?
The next day I figured it out. The next day I'm like, oh, that was good. The point. So just keep them locked. Keep them there.
I'm glad you had that epiphany, because when you said that, I was like, oh no, he doesn't really get it. Like, this is, oh man. But I mean, Kellorn's exactly right. Like, sometimes that was 6 squads, and Sloan, as an admiral, her entire goal is to do effects on ships, and you took 5/6 of the game away from that admiral doing anything, and it was unreal. Like, and what Kellorn's saying, like, you take that margin that you've created in the squad game, and now you jump those ships. I think in that game that we're talking about, that's exactly what happened. I think we had to pack up early because the store was closing, but like, your ships were primed to take his out because he had done nothing to your ships at all. So that's a good precursor to going into the first element of designing a good fleet that I want to talk about, and that's the 3 ways to win and methods to achieve the win. And the first one I want to talk about, or the 3 that are in my mind, the 3 ways to win: you either destroy their ships, you keep yours on the board, or you earn more points. And I know that last one kind of sounds like it's redundant, but we'll get to what that means in a minute. But, in this example, this game that we're talking about, what you effectively did is you kept your units on the board in time for you to start destroying their ships. So I guess the first thing, destroying their ships, the first concept. What, Kellorn, give me some ideas of some fleets that really leverage this one aspect of winning the game. What are some of the fleets that you found that really leverage just destroying the opponent's ships?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is double onager. I mean, the whole point of double onager is to kill you, and to kill you before you can get close enough to the onagers to do any damage back. Another one that's a pretty good point of that, though it's not quite as clear cut, in my opinion, is like things like Akbar TRC 90s. I mean, you're really not going to score points in other ways with those ships. They're literally there just to poke you to death with 1,000 paper cuts. I mean, that's the whole point. To another degree, Super Star Destroyers tend to be lists that want to kill you as a way to win the game. Yes, sometimes they want to sit on an objective, but by and large, the point of the Super Star Destroyer is to kill you. Now, I also think that Sloan kind of falls into this a little bit, because the whole idea of Sloan is to strip your tokens away to make your ships easier to kill. But there's some weird objective interactions that go in hand with that.
Yeah, I have no qualms about what you said. There aren't a lot of I think this is the first thing that newer players arrive at, is they understand at the end of the day, the whole point is to blow up your opponent's ships, at least on the surface level of this game. And so this is the very first win condition that most players arrive at. And so you get to the fun fleets, you get to the TF fleets, you get to the Super Star Destroyers, you get to the Onagers, the ones where you're rolling a bunch of dice. Martuk. Yeah, exactly. Martuk is another example of this. Akbar, you said it. A lot of the dice add commanders. We had a hot take about that a couple episodes ago. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. So moving into the second win condition, or the way to win, is keeping yours on the board.
I'm really good at this, by the way.
Yeah, lay it on me. Like, what are some examples of fleets that keep pieces on the board?
So, I mean, I'm going to start with it because I've been playing it, but I mean, Starhawk fleets are literally about points denial. I mean, the whole point of my Starhawk fleet is to have 216 or so points that I am never, ever going to let you have. But another great example of this are Gar fleets that are using a bunch of Peltas. I mean, like, if it was Alan, right? That posted that 5 Pelta fleet the other day.
Yeah, just so gross. Yeah,
it was so gross. It literally made me want to throw up, because you can't kill it all. Like, there's no, like, it's almost impossible to kill all of those ships in one game.
And I was gonna say, Gar, like, even as a new player, I have rarely been ran off the table with Gar. Like, I only have a few tablings against me using Gar, and this is as a rookie. Gar is just a tanky fleet, and I got to that conclusion really fast of, okay, I can keep my pieces on the board. Now what?
Yeah, and a lot of their commanders lend themselves to that. Bail, Luminara, even Tarkin to a degree, even Obi-Wan, even though we don't really see him very often. Gar in general is just really good at this particular win condition. I'm going to stay on the board, and if you have no points, every single point I gain adds to my margin of victory, which is kind of a big deal.
So I guess your last point here is about talking about earning more points than your opponent, or earning points without surrendering any, I think, is another way to look at it. And I guess I wanted to bring up the game that I just played not too long ago against another Starhawk player. And it was a game that I felt like most people felt like I had a disadvantage in, because the other Starhawk outbid me. So I guess when you looked at when I was playing the last game here, Fox, in the international team competition, what did you see when I was going to be forced to go first?
A lot of it was you do that early math on whether you two can feasibly get the other's piece off the board. It's a combination of destroy their ships and keep yours on the board. With you going first in this scenario, um, as the one who strikes first, often you're going to have the capacity to knock him out first. However, objectives come into play, you know. And I mean, this last win condition is kind of what we're going to be talking about, but and that's what your fleet leverages is um objectives. And so when I thought, man, he's going first, I knew that the win was going to rely on your are your squads more killy than his squads. And what's funny
Which they
is
were.
which
They
they
were.
were, but also the way he designed his squad ball was to keep them on the board, right? He had a Jam Bigs ball, which was separate. It got separated a little bit in the initial scruff, but that's literally what we're talking about. Like the squad game is kind of a mini exercise in these win conditions where you had the capacity with Lando and Dash to knock out squads faster than his X-Wings could, even though the whole design around that squad ball was to keep them on the board, you know?
So, one of the things I just want to clarify for other rookies, which this one I believe would be obvious, but just in case, the squad ball. So most of your squadrons, you kind of keep them within a certain essentially command radius of whoever your squad leader, quote unquote, would be. So that's why everybody generally just refers to it as a squad ball. You keep them close, you keep them tight, and it's a ball. But what I really want to swing around to is that early game math. That's one of the spots where I admittedly feel like super weak in. Like, I'll look at the board and I'm just like, okay, I just need them to play my game. Let's just have them play my game.
So one of the things that I wanted to jump into here, and using this game against Kaiser as an example, um, Kaiser had a Starhawk that was close to a mirror to mine, but instead of going with rogues, he went with the Hera Biggs ball that we're starting to see a fair amount of, as Fox said, and knowing that I was going to have to be first player changed how I looked at this game. So when he revealed his objectives, he had surprise attack, contested outpost, and doom station. Either one of contested outpost or doom station, he's basically going to get to farm more or less the whole game. So if I do that, I'm literally just giving him points that I have to overcome, and my chances of winning in that particular scenario go down dramatically. So I chose surprise attack, which sounds like it's an awful objective, but I literally placed my Starhawk facing backwards on the board and flew away from him and um, uh, forced the engagement to extend into turn 4 and turn 5 and turn 6, because I didn't want to go up against him. I didn't want to run into him because that was going to lose. I was going to lose if I did that.
Yeah, exactly. So the objectives kind of forced a particular type of engagement. Julia Whiskey, to your point, so the math there, like what we're talking about, these first two win conditions are if you're able to just blow up more ships than him, or you keep your ships on the board while any point that gets blown up on their side adds to your margin of victory. The third way to win is to leverage objectives or points. And what you're talking about, calculating it in general, when you walk up to a game, especially in a tournament, you should know exactly how much your ships cost, right? Because whenever yours blow up, that's adding to your opponent's win condition. You can only do so much in a tournament as far as memorizing their point values. But I would suggest, like in a tournament setting, when you are walking around the table to look at your opponent's objective or your opponent's upgrades, or whenever they hand you their fleet list, don't just look at what upgrades they've got. Also look at what the point total on their ships end up being. And it gives you an idea of what you can trade or what is a commensurate amount of points for particular ships in your fleet, right? Um, Objectives also help with this. If you've got objectives that are getting you points, this math becomes easier and easier and easier. So in your pursuit of destroying their ships and you lose yours, these objective points can make up for it. It's a lot of how I think about it in my Dooku fleet. I'm essentially paying for ships that I'm planning on losing. And that's a lot of the theme in Separatists is I have a 59 point hard sell or 57 point hard sell. I'm planning on getting more points than that in my objectives. And if I'm not, I'm using an objective that is going to give me such high leveraging in the actual how the combat actually plays itself out that I will be blowing up more ships than them. That's a lot of fleet design and thinking about how you're going to win after game after game after game is trading up your points or paying for your own losses,
See that makes sense in my head now that you mention it, because you've seen every fleet list that I create. Heck, you help me build them most of the time. Actually, almost every single time. Anyways, but a lot of my objectives are sit back, come to me. I'm going to point farm, and then once you get too close, I'm going to pounce on you. But I've been thinking about it the wrong way. So that just gives me a better idea of what to think about.
Yeah, a good example of this with your fleet is contested outpost. Like, it's really easy to try to leverage my ships aren't going to blow up part of the win condition that you've got with your Republic fleet. A big aspect of your fleet, your yellow objective is contested outpost, which seems really, really good on paper. You're leveraging your fleet's ability to stay on the board, right? And you're getting points for just staying on the board. You're staying right beside the station. But when you do the math, if you earned victory points every single round for being on the contested outpost, it ends up being 120 points. You get 20 points per round. What if you lose your Venator in your pursuit of getting those points? You lose because your Venator costs more than the amount of points that you earn for that objective. This is the kind of math you have to do at fleet building. Is it worth having particular objectives? And can you leverage those other two win conditions enough while you consider that?
Oh, yeah, trust me. I've officially learned that lesson at the last tournament. Um, I had contested outposts, I think 2 times, and it did nothing for me. And now that you bring up thinking about, hey, if I have this all 6 rounds, is it worth one of my ships? Most of the time, the answer is no. So this is why I still got to go back in and rebuild my fleet. And so I'm looking at squadrons and blah, blah, blah.
So one thing I want to talk about here is contested outpost in general, because I feel like contested outpost is one of those that is on paper is really attractive, and you want to take it. You're just like, I'm just going to sit there and make them come to me. But I want to talk for a second about the downsides of contested outpost. First, if you're playing contested outpost, your opponent knows where you're going to deploy. There's no deployment shenanigans, and we'll get into deployment here in more depth later. But just keep in mind that if you're playing a contested outpost, you're telegraphing exactly what your deployment is to your opponent. And then 2, there are fleets that can play a long range game where they can kill you without getting close to you. I'm talking about things like Slanager or Double Onager. Like, they're going to happily take contested outpost, and they don't care if you're going to farm some points, because they're going to kill whatever you have sitting on that station.
One of my favorite things you did at a local tournament is you brought a superstar destroyer and you you took out contested outpost and replaced it with asteroid tactics, which is like a 3D chess move, because it seems tantalizing at first, but one of the main ways you try to take down or several of the ways that you try to take down an SSD is you get them to land on obstacles and you take away their defense tokens, either through an intel officer or just over exhausting those tokens. Asteroid Tactics says nah to both of those, and it was such a flip on how people typically think about running that type of fleet. Usually, if you're going to take a superstar destroyer, heck yeah, I'm going to sit on this. I'm going to sit on this station, and I'm going to earn 120 points. What are you going to do? When in reality, if I blow up your superstar destroyer before the end of round 4, you got 60 points. I got 400 plus the 20 from taking that contested outpost. It doesn't make any sense. But this is exactly what you're talking about, though.
So the 40 Trest move from that particular list, Fox, was that everybody could see that taking Asteroid Tactics against a Superstar Destroyer was a bad idea. And so they picked what I really, really wanted them to pick, which was Solar Corona.
This is actually leading us into the next topic I want to talk about, because Solar Corona leverages it leverages deployments, and so what I want to do is I want to move into this question first to Juliet Whiskey, and then moving into another topic. Juliet Whiskey, what do you think is stronger, first or second, and why?
So my my gut reaction is second. And why? Because I get to control the board. You play my objectives, you play my game. You have to figure out how to get around what I have set up. But as of lately, I'm starting to lean more on, really, I wouldn't be able to pick between first or second. And this is for later down the board, but the point game and how much everybody's coming in and bidding, and I'm just kind of like, people really aren't caring about first or second. At least at my last few tournament experiences, people really didn't care. They're pushing that bid as close as possible. So maybe I was missing something there.
Yeah, you missed a big thing at the TXO. And Kellorn taking a 8-point bid and absolutely dominating with second player. I think
I was first once. Jason Girth, if you're listening, you made me be first player.
You were first once, and it didn't really do anything. But I mean, I guess that's what we need to talk about. If second player, I think generally you're right. Like, castling fleets right now, if you can withstand onager shots, are really, really good. If you can force people to move into your firing range, you can leverage that to a pretty fantastical degree. What do you do, Kellorn, if you get first right now in this meta? Like, what is your goal if you're given first?
So I don't think that first or second is inherently better or worse. I think that this comes down to that people need to think about these things while they're building their fleets. So when I put my Starhawk fleet together, I wanted to put as nasty of a fleet together that was going to go when it goes second, and therefore I was willing to bid for second to a certain degree. Now there are a whole bunch of answers, and we don't have to get into what those answers are, but I also knew that if I was going to be first, that I also had a plan, and that plan is in most cases, and notwithstanding the game that we talked about earlier, but in most cases, the plan when I'm first player as the Starhawk is to navigate until I can end up in a double arc of their big ship and only be taking one shot back. That's the goal as first player, and as first player, you're likely to be able to get to do that if you're willing to navigate for 2, 3, 4 turns at the beginning of the game. So in general, that's my quote unquote plan if I'm first player. But those are the things that I thought about before I got to the tournament. They were the things I thought about while I was putting the fleet together. So in a way, I think that you need to have a plan in your head of, this is what I'm going to do if I'm first player, and this is what I'm going to do if I'm second player, in general terms. It doesn't have to be fully flawed out, but if in general terms you want to talk it in your head, you want to be like, these are the things that I'm going to do in these two conditions. And then when you get to the table and there's an opponent across from you, you modify those conditions based on what you see. But if you don't think about that before you go, you have to make up all that ground when you get to the tournament.
Yeah, this leads us into what I call the parafleet stats, where you have three stats that aren't necessarily an active part of helping you blowing up ships, but they control elements of the game in very, very big ways. And that would be bid, deployments, and activations, right? And so what we're talking about right now in choosing first or second, or really wanting to go one of those, is bid. Why do you want a choice? Juliet Whiskey, from your perspective, what does bid achieve? Why do you want to take points away from your fleet to potentially make it less killy in order to decide whether you're first or second? Like, what are scenarios that you've seen where you really enjoyed being second, or you thought, man, I really wish I wasn't second right now?
So I think I answered this one in the first half, but I always have kept my numbers low. Like every tournament that we've gone to, I always ask, hey, what was the last few tournaments? What were the bids looking like? And then I purposely aim for below that, and the reason for it is just so they can play my game. Now, blindly, of course, like we mentioned even earlier, all of my objectives are sit and you come to me. So you have to fight your way in to a tanky fleet to even try to get a kill while I'm sitting here picking up points. Now, yes, there are fleets out there that are actually really good at that. This is why I have a burning hatred for Oningers. Oh, I hate them so much. But I'm getting off topic. But yeah, I prefer second, and I feel like that's why I always look for that low bid.
Yeah, and so I I do think pieces like onagers, the strength of certain objectives, like people feel passionately, even newer players, about wanting to go first or second. It definitely happened to you. I kept asking you, like, hey, if you go first, what happens? Like, what is your plan for going first? I think, Kellorn, you probably nailed it on the head. Like, a lot of first player's advantage is determining engage, like the first activation of engagement, and determining how that is going to go down, either in determining double arcs, determining an exit vector, determining an approach. That is the advantage of first player, and how you exploit that. I think a Starhawk does it really well because it has the arc lines and the navigation chart to be able to guarantee a double. That is where you get an advantage in first player.
So I guess one thing that I want to bring up here in terms of first player and bids is that there are fleets out there that are bidding for first. And the reason that someone might, like, it used to be fairly common to bid for first, especially if you had a high activation fleet, so that you could try and go last and then go first. Now, but in this particular case, I'm talking about Radis. And Radis wants to generally go first because in my case, because I have the ship that Radis is dropping, and then I'm usually using Profundity to have a hammerhead inside of the Radis ship. And Radis says that I can't go with the ship that Radis dropped first, but I can go with that hammerhead. And that hammerhead has Shriv on it, and it's got Ezra on it, and then it's got X-Rax and Geralt's Honor. So I'm going to do everything I want to do with that ship before you activate, before you can do anything. And then if I lose it, I was planning on losing it, and it did everything that I wanted it to do already before you had a chance to do anything back. And therefore, I am bidding for first player. But that's a kind of niche case as well.
No, but it's exactly what we're talking about. Like, you're determining exactly the angles, the arcs, all of that jazz as first player. Radis conveniently moves us into the other, the next parafleet stat, and that would be deployments. Because what Radis does conveniently is it messes with the deployment game. What? So, Kellorn, what do you see as the primary advantage of having a higher amount of deployments, and what are some of the things you've seen done with deployments recently?
So I guess one of the things about deployments is that deployment advantage is one of the things that I watch people throw away the most. And I'll watch people either put down a ship that they shouldn't put down first or second or before the end. I'll watch people have the deployment advantage and then deploy in such a way with their last ship that they get to deploy after all of mine, and then put it in a spot that doesn't give them an advantage. And so I think that deployments are a very powerful part of Armada, but I also feel like they're a really easy one to mess up. In terms of Radis is actually at a deployment disadvantage because you have those ships that are in hyperspace that you're going to Radis in, and therefore he has to deploy in such a way that you're going to know where he is. But you kind of flip that on its head, and Radis has a huge deployment advantage because he has stuff in hyperspace that's going to come out at a time of his choosing, at a place of his choosing. So it's one of those things where, like, in terms of my Starhawk fleet, I often have a deployment advantage where my Starhawk's going to go down last, and I can put my Starhawk in a place where either I can force an engagement or I can avoid an engagement, and that allows me to dictate the terms of that engagement, and it makes the Starhawk even less likely to die.
Man, this is for the noobs, the rookies, the prides. Listen, get your deployment game on point. Spend some time at home and get your deployment game figured out, and get it figured out quickly, because that's one of the hardest lessons that that I know I keep saying I'm still wrestling with, but I'm still wrestling with, is that deployment game and how many ships you have out or how many ships you have in your fleet. Because there have been too many times where, I have it in the bag. They can't take me out, but the way that everything gets deployed puts me at a severe disadvantage.
Yeah, I would say my advice to a newer player is if you've got less than 7 deployments and you look at your speed chart, your maneuver chart, and all of your base clicks are 0, like you cannot manipulate your space in a severe degree from the very, very beginning, then you need to really practice deployment. This is where Gergerod, I think, really becomes a very good commander, because he is what he really is at his base is he is a deployment forgiveness tool, where you can be pretty much really dumb with where you put your ships and be extremely reactive to how your opponent deploys, and thus regain the advantage in the deployment game that you potentially lost. So if you don't have a lot of base clicks, for instance, if you're not flying a Providence as a Separatist player, where speed 1 you get a native 2 clicks, if you, what would that be? Gazanti for the Imperials, you got a lot of base clicks. Those are, if you don't have a lot of those types of ships in your fleet, you need to be very, very cautious and careful and plan out how the game is going to go. You can practice this. Like, you don't have to have someone across the table from you to deploy and play out maneuvering, especially if you're planning on going for that second win condition that we talked about earlier, keeping your pieces on the board. You're going to want to know how those pieces evolve in the space across 3, 4, 5 rounds. That's going to really help you out. The last pair of fleet stat I want to talk about is activations. We've seen a drop off on this, honestly, since 1.5. We've got pass tokens that mitigate this to a degree. Juliet Whiskey and your fleet, we need to post your fleet at some point. Maybe we can do that, or what you were flying.
Why would you do that to me? Why? Why would you do that?
Well, it gives everybody context. But
that's a horrible context.
No, it's good context, because everyone's like, well, what is this fleet? What is he flying? Well, typically you've only had 3 activations in it. And as second another reason why you probably felt like second player has been great is you've been getting all these pass tokens to help with activation advantage. let's talk about what activations are doing for the game right now. And if you wanted to fly a high activation fleet, what is your plan? You know,
So I'm not flying a high activation fleet anytime soon. I'm not even going to go down that path. I would love to, but I just don't. I don't have the money for it. But I did learn my lesson on activations, because at almost majority of the tournaments, it has been pretty low activation numbers, and I've had my pass token, and no, the pass token never really played into second player. Most of the time, I usually forgot it was there. But it was when I was flying against Fox, and my first experience with the MSU fleet, multiple small units, right?
that's correct. Yeah, that was a pretty brutal game.
Yeah, but he had so many activations. It didn't matter that I went second. He still went dead last. And so he'd end and then he'd start. And I'm just like, I can't do anything against this. So those activations become so crucial. And I hate to say it, but every time I'm up against the MSU, I'm just like, this game's a wash. I'm out. I got nothing. I need more activations.
No, 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 don't say that. What really helped was a lot of I had 3 Architans in that fleet and Demolisher, and so that's a lot of long range firepower, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about as far as if you're going to fly high activation fleets right now, you need a way to mitigate pass token usage, and a lot of that is you need longer range options. It's the reason why Akbar MSU or Riken MSU is still kind of Riken MSU in particular is very viable, and that's because you got to move into their kill zones more often than not. If you're flying only 3 activations or 4 activations, like you've got no choice. You're going to move into those red dice zones, and then like you were just saying, Juliet Whiskey, like they get activation at the top of the next round, so they can move their most vulnerable piece. MSU's on the rise because of this, and the fleets that are going to be able to do it the best are going to be able to leverage red dice. I'm waiting for a GAR MSU player with a bunch of consulars and red dice. I think that's going to be absolutely nasty if someone can start nailing that.
Yeah, that was like once we played that. Once I played Jew with that MSU, I'm like, I kept looking over guard. I'm like, how can I make this? Like, I want to try this one good time, but I couldn't figure it out. But you said counselor, so I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that and see if I can do something with it.
So I guess the one thing that you talked about, pass tokens not coming into, forgetting that pass tokens are there. I think that the importance of pass tokens is that in general, as long as your opponent does not have more than double your activations, you can guarantee that you will go last on one turn. And I think that is something that you need to keep in mind of when is that going to be important? When is it important that you go last as second player? And because that's one of the reasons why we're talking about second player being more powerful is that it used to be that it didn't matter, that if you were first player and you had more activations than your opponent, then you could always leverage that. And usually you only really wanted to do it on one turn, maybe 2. And so what pass tokens are doing is saying, no, the second player is going to get to go last on one turn. And that takes away a lot of the punch of a last first type of fleet.
The advantage of second player MSU is that effectively you lose pass tokens as first player. You lose 1. So like if I have 6 ships and you have 3, you're only going to get 2. So I'm always going to have 2 ships activating after you. So you got to flip the way that you think about that. Don't think of it as, oh, I don't get to activate first. Think of it as like these 2 ships that I activate after you are the first 2 activations of the next round. That's the way I've tried to think of it. And so whenever you flip your mentality, your setup round becomes more valuable and you start to really value the approach, because then you can think about, well, what speed are they going? What ranges are they moving into? What ranges are advantageous for me? Can I avoid shots? And then if I get 3 activations after you, in an ideal world, on a pass token turn, and I've got a lot of long range firepower, that's the way to think about it. I get to activate 3 entire ships before you get to activate another one. That's a lot of offensive firepower right now. Separatists I'm going to talk about separatists a lot, but they can leverage that to a huge degree with things like Patriot Fist. It's one of the reasons why, fleets like Kraken 7 or something like that can do very, very well, because, man, you got to move into a Patriot Fist shot. That sucks. That's really awful. And there's nothing you can do. You're just going to move into that range, and I effectively get the first activation of the next round on you. You know what I mean?
I do. But I mean, like I said, I think that activations have trended down since 1.5 has come out. Now, I know that you and some of the other MSU players are starting to push them back up, but one of the things about those pass tokens is that you really have to get to 7 to have any chance of being last and then first on a consistent basis.
Yeah, but that's if you're an MSU that wants to leverage first. I prefer to be an MSU that leverages second. That's how my Dooku fleet works. So in taking all of these parafleet stats with bid and deployments and activations, I've developed kind of a golden standard. If you're out there and you're wondering, man, maybe I'm not winning the engagement, maybe I'm not blowing up my opponent's ships as often as I'd like to. This is a good golden standard for being in a position to win these parafleet stats, and that would be 5, 7, and 5. If you have a bid of 5 and 7 deployments and 5 activations, you are going to beat 70% or more of all of the fleets out there right now. There are so few fleets that are doing more than 7 deployments. They are out there, about 30% of them, maybe 20% of them. But if you design a fleet right now that has a bid of 5 or less, 7 or more deployments, and 5 or more activations, you can begin to understand how to leverage this part of the concept, or this part of the game. It's a really, really important part of the game, and maybe that's the part that you might be missing whenever you're flying, is if you're always going first and you're missing the aspect of second player, or if you're always out deployed, or if you're always out activated, there are going to be parts of the game that you can leverage that you really haven't thought of before. So that golden standard of 5-7-5 is a good place to start whenever you're designing a fleet, Okay, so what I want to do now, after we've talked about these two things, these parafleet stats and the 3 ways to win, Kellorn, do you want to kind of riff off some of the fleets that have been really successful recently that leverage some of these aspects? We kind of talked about individual fleets in the win condition topic, but now that we've talked about all of this, what are some fleets that you've seen that take a lot of these things and leverage them on a high competitive level?
Well, I mean, we've got the kind of the new Yularen archetype that's either 3 or 4 activations, and it will have it'll have 4 arcs, both of the V19 aces, a Delta 7, and Anakin Skywalker and a Delta 7. And it's 100 perfect 134 points of squads. Usually it's running 2 medical frigate Peltas, and it's using the Yularen to heal its squads. And I'm here to tell you guys, it is an awful, awful fleet to play against. It's very difficult to kill those squads. There is some vulnerability because usually they're running an acclimator as their quote unquote big ship, and so that acclimator can be vulnerable. But if you are going into that squad fight expecting to win, you're in for a real bad time. So another one to think about. That I've seen a fair bit recently are the various Hera Biggs balls that are going around, and there's a bunch of different ways to pull it off. You can do it with a in a gate. Usually it's in a gate commander, and you're going to use something like an assault frigate or a MC-80 or even a Starhawk. We've seen. Um, Usually you've got a supporting cast of 3 or 4 activations again with a really big squad ball. And if you're sensing a theme about things like the things that are being really effective right now are usually centered around 75, 100, 134 points of squads. And then another one that has been quite effective that I've seen thrown around quite a bit this year. Last year it was kind of Slanager and double Onager, but this year the Riken MSU fleets, specifically the ones that are supported by again a bunch of rogue squadrons, are getting to be more and more difficult to deal with, because to force them to in a bad place, you have to be able to take 2 pieces off the board in a single turn, and that's something that's a pretty tall order for most fleets to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, and one of the themes in everything you just cited there is the win conditions of staying on the board across all of those. Riken stays on the board. Arcs stay on the board, especially if you're repairing them. Hera Biggs balls, they're going to stay on the board, and they're going to do enough. All of those fleets are going to do enough to destroy your ships. And so by losing no points and gaining, so everything they destroy on your fleet is just adding to their margin of victory. And not only that, but if you start to include objectives, I do think some of those fleets struggle with objectives, particularly the Yularen fleet. I don't know. It's hard to think of the yellow objective that they leverage. I think fighter ambush is kind of in the past. But so they struggle on that part. I think that's another vulnerability actually in those fleets is leveraging objectives. But that's exactly right. I think talking about my fleet for a second, my Dooku fleet, I'm finally going to get to talk about it. I hit all of those golden numbers. I have a bid that's greater than 5. I have 7 deployments. I have 5 activations. I beat almost every fleet in these parafleet stats. And not only that, but as second player, I'm going to earn way more points than you. And my Munificent is going to stay on the board. Having higher deployments allows me to keep my Recusant on the board. Like, it's a very fragile piece, but if you consider your deployments as a way to keep your more fragile pieces alive, I'm also doing it that way. And it's very killy too. I don't plan on destroying all of your ships. That's not my plan. I plan on destroying your most threatening thing and then running and hoping that, not hoping, typically doing enough in objective points to not really care about any further engagement.
One of the things I would like to cover on a later episode is the bid game, and truly the bid game, because right now in my head it's I'm bidding for first or I'm bidding for second. But you just brought up a point that I haven't even heard yet of 5 points. Is there a golden ratio in there somewhere? But of course, this is for another episode.
I think that's a great transition, Fox, if you want to take us into talking about what we learned about the last chance qualifier at Worlds today.
Yeah, we had a post that was on the main Armada Discord, and it's kind of floated around a little bit. People are asking about Worlds and qualifying for it. We've had several large events where people have won qualifying tickets, and they're going to be honoring all of the 2019 to 2020 regional champion or regional wins for Worlds tickets. And so, but the big question has been, does that create too many people going? Is there going to be a last chance qualifier like they typically have? And so people have been asking, and someone finally got a response, and the response is, at this time, there isn't a plan for a last chance qualifier tournament, which I have mixed emotions about. It stinks because a lot of people haven't been able to get to those bigger tournaments. um, I understand where they're coming from. That I guess there might be a fear that too many people will show up, but in the past, that really hasn't been a problem. And in fact, a lot of people who win tickets don't, especially in the international, when you're going overseas, a lot of them aren't. It's not really feasible for all of them to be purchasing plane tickets and hotel stays and staying for a couple days and then flying back to play Armada. That's a big ask, and so I think a lot of their worries in deciding this are unwarranted. Kellorn, how do you feel about this?
I'm not conflicted. I'm really, really mad, to be perfectly honest. I'm really upset because uh, mostly due to the fact that we've been trying and trying and trying to get an Armada Worlds qualifier in either Texas or in the South or somewhere that's within driving range of a whole host of people that are kind of below the Mason-Dixon line. And it's just like absolute radio silence and absolute and no, and we've had no real ability to get a world's qualifier in our area, and yet we have both Adepticon this year and Gen Con, which are both in the Midwest. I believe Nova is going to have one in Northern Virginia and the Washington D.C. area, and we're hearing some rumors about one that might be out west later in the year. So you've got them that are kind of spread out in that way for all the regions of the United States except the southern region. And it's just been really, really frustrating that you and I decided, oh, we are not going to go to Adepticon this year because we expected there to be another Worlds qualifier in an area that we could get to a little easier than Adepticon in March. And then and we figured, oh, worst case, there'll be a last chance qualifier, and we'll just go to Adepticon and play a whole bunch of games, which is really, really difficult, by the way, and then try and get in that way. And so when you have the double whammy of not having a reasonable Worlds qualifier to get to, and not having a last chance qualifier, it's just like, well, what are you going to do about all the people that just got into Armada in the last couple of years that didn't get a chance to go to one of these tournaments previously, or didn't get a chance to go to a qualifier because there wasn't one within range?
Yeah, um, yeah. From a competitive standpoint, it really, really sucks. Um, and I think the thing I'm most bummed about is in during the pandemic. You and I have talked about this at length. That the Armada community has become very much an online community during the pandemic, and a lot of bonds have been created, a lot of relationships, a lot of friendships have been made across this game, and it's a part of why I love this game so much is the culture and the camaraderie that comes with it. Um, but a big part of what I was looking forward to was getting to meet a lot of the people, getting to meet a lot of these Discord handles that I've been interacting with, and now I'm speaking to over the interwebs. And that part is particularly frustrating for me. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, they said there's nothing planned at this time, so it's not like this is solid news. It's just if as a community we can't communicate that this is something that we want, and that I know a lot of people would really want, even if there were 4 tickets, people would go. You and I would go if there were only 4 spots available to move into the tournament proper. You and I would definitely go. And I think a lot of people are in that same boat. And just because you get to go and you get to play and you get to hang out and meet people, yeah, hopefully they double back and this can be a reality, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in the same place as you are. It's frustrating. I'm still hold out some hope that they change their mind, but for now, I'm definitely looking for options, and we'll just kind of leave it there.
yeah, well, we are nearing the end here. Juliet Whiskey, are you able to give Kellorn and myself our do you thinks for the day?
I am a baby clone, fresh out the tube. I am shiny and new, and I am ready. So,
What does that even mean?
What are you talking about?
somebody will get it. Somebody out there in the world will get it. Anyways, okay. So, do you think hot take 30 time? Let's go, baby. Hot take 30. I wish I had like one of those little buzzers I could press that made the little air horn noise.
Yeah, we need an air horn. We need a pew, 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 pew. Yeah.
Fox. Man, why you gotta put big words in there? Having an unconventional Fox. Do you think having an unconventional list is better because not only will you know how to fly it, but your opponent won't have taught against it,
Yeah.
or have a plan for flying against it. Excuse the beeping.
It's excused. Do I think because my opponent won't have teched against it, have a plan of flying against? Yeah, I actually think this is one of the more underrated parts of the game right now. I think if you bring something that's not predicted or is counter to the meta, or just is something people haven't seen. I mean, it's clearly this is something I've leveraged now for the past 8 months, and people still haven't decided to tech against me. And I so as a Dooku player, people keep saying that Raid is weak, and yet they're weak. Yeah, I said it. And
I want one of the things I saw you have this question. I was kind of jealous because I wanted to answer it, but I also want to address a thing that this is kind of one of those one trick pony kinds of things. If you come in with a surprise list that does something weird or unique or individual, a lot of times people are going to have a way to plan for it in the future. So yes, you're going to surprise somebody and you might get a win because of that surprise. But I think that's also really dependent upon who's across the table from you. Because when you get into the players that are more and more experienced, they're going to look across the table and say, oh, yeah, he's trying to do something unusual. I'm going to do this to counter it within the means that I have.
But I think you can get weird enough with it. I think my Dooku fleet gets weird enough with it. It has for 8 months, and no one's really figured out a way to solidly counter it. And not only that, but if you're going to a tournament, like it doesn't matter if someone kind of sees it coming after the tournament after. All that matters is this tournament right now. I'm surprising everybody. So I see what you're saying, but also like, okay.
All right. Well, I think that we're going to go ahead and call it there because our friend Juliet Whiskey has to head out for the night here. But we will cover LSO in depth next week as both Fox and I are heading up there, and we'll let you guys know how that goes. Until next time, fly safe, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Armada Podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, keep up with the show on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at Armada Podcast. Join us on Discord with the link in the show notes. Until next time.